have Veena Sikri, former High Commissioner, and Narendra Taneja, global energy expert, now joining me live. Thank you so much to the both of you and welcome to NDTV Profit. Veena ji, given the record Trump-Putin summit and the upcoming Trump-Zelenskyy meeting, how are you assessing the current diplomatic posture of the US towards Ukraine? And what are the implications for India's geopolitical balancing act?
Well, I would actually put quite a positive construct on the summit meeting between President Trump and President Putin. First of all, President Trump himself called it a 10 on 10. So obviously, he has assessed it very well. Secondly, President Putin actually gave a lot more details in his own indirect way. And he said an understanding has emerged. And then he requested that the European leaders should not try and scuttle that understanding or upset that understanding by behind the scenes activities. So I think that what we can see is that there is the core of an understanding, the kernel of an understanding has emerged between President Trump and President Putin. The red lines for each are clear, and President Trump clearly does see this as a basis for a future deal. But obviously, for the deal to materialize, you need President Zelenskyy on board. And with him, he has behind him all the European leaders, including the Prime Minister of the UK. And we know that already President Trump had a 1-hour conversation with President Zelenskyy on the way back in Air Force One. And then, of course, the meeting has been fixed for Monday. I think that they are hoping that very quickly the whole peace deal, the deal will emerge, and there could be a second meeting very soon. This was also hinted in the outcome of the press conference between President Trump and President Zelenskyy when President Putin said next time in Moscow. So and President Trump's reaction was not that negative. He said yes, we can see. So clearly they are working for a quick move on this front. On the question of sanctions, President Trump has told one of his, I think, correspondents in a Fox News interview when he was asked that, well, China is buying so much oil from Russia, then why aren't you putting sanctions on them? So President Trump said, look, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait 2-3 weeks. Let's see how it emerges. Maybe sanctions will not be necessary. So I think that even on this question of sanctioning those who are buying Russian oil, even on this question, there seems to be an understanding between President Trump and President Putin. And I think this issue of the sanctions about buying oil from Russia, that will, not come into focus now. But of course, the original 25% sanction, that has to be discussed when the trade team comes from Delhi at the end of August.
Correct. And I'd like now Narendra to actually weigh in on that now that we're talking about energy, because with tensions persisting in Ukraine and this evolving US-Russia and US-Ukraine dialogue, how could these developments impact the global energy markets, and what do you think India should keep an eye on in terms of energy security?
Well, energy, as you know, is a geopolitical commodity. So anything that happens at the global landscape, especially if it happens between the United States and Russia. The United States is the biggest producer of oil, energy, and Russia is a very important producer of energy, and in fact, an energy superpower. And if you really saw the interview of President Trump with Fox News, that happened immediately after the summit. And it was a long interview. And if you really go by that interview and the body language of President Trump, is very clear that, something very positive actually had been agreed. But at this stage, probably because it involves Ukraine, President Trump didn't want to make any announcement because it's a very sensitive issue. And this might actually involve swapping territories. And so that becomes, again, super sensitive, especially for people of Ukraine. And then there are some European leaders, they have gone their own, views on the issue. So I think he decided to wait, or they decided to wait. And in the meantime, as you also reported, President Trump and President Zelenskyy had a discussion on that. So all these things are being very closely watched by energy markets worldwide, because as I said, oil in particular is 90% politics. Or let me say geopolitics, 90%. And Russia's strength, if you look at Russia's power, nuclear weapons and oil and gas, that's basically what is Russia, what makes Russia a superpower in a way. So therefore, I think, people are looking at, my own sense is that, it has been a very positive summit. and the outcome of that we will know. But I think what they have decided, they could announce something which would have really made a big headline, but they decided not to do it without Ukraine in the room. So next time, I think Ukraine is going to be in the room. And then in the meantime, President, Trump is already talking with Western leaders, EU leaders, including, British Prime Minister and of course, President Zelensky, and trying to kind of, sort out everything before the next summit. So I think my sense is that, we will see the summit between President Trump, President Putin, and President Zelensky within a few weeks. And that is how global markets, oil market, though they are not, important leaders in the energy markets are interpreting it.
Okay.
So there is no disappointment. Prices are not gone up. There is no anxiety. In fact, if the interpretation is that probably something is going to go, something good is going to come out of it.
Absolutely, and it has been a weekend of good news, I have to say. But if just a follow-up to that, these sustained geopolitical tensions between Russia and the West influence India's energy imports and strategic partnerships. So how do we look at the future then?
Good question. This is actually a very important question. My own sense is that, as you know, that we started importing oil from Russia. There was no design. What happened was that, Western countries, they imposed sanctions against Russia, following the Ukrainian crisis. And our traditional supplier of oil, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Abu Dhabi, and all these countries, they got busy selling oil to Western Europe because Western Europe was paying more money. So we started facing some difficulties in getting good deals from these countries of the Gulf. So the result was, in the meantime, we saw the Russian oil was available in the market. So we started buying oil from Russia. But in the process, we ensured one thing, India ensured one thing, that there was no big disruption in global oil supply chains. So in fact, America should be thanking to us. But now what has happened in the meantime, what America did and the kind of language that President Trump used for India, for Indian economy is dead and so on and so forth. At one stage, he even said Indian Russian economy, let them go to, basically in Hindi saying, "Bahar mein jaye," that kind of expression. It did go down well in Delhi. So the result was yesterday, the Prime Minister from the rampart of the Red Fort announced that we are now going to work for energy self-reliance. And he also announced, not only energy self-announced, he also announced that, a deep water mission means that our companies are going to drill, explore for oil in deep water in Andaman, in Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and so on and so forth. So in fact, what has happened, this kind of attitude we have in terms of energy security, our dependence on imports, for oil about 88%, for, natural gas for roughly 56%, and even for solar panels was so high so in fact, we got a wake-up call from President Trump. So thank you very much, President Trump. And in the process, as the Prime Minister announced, now we're going to work for number one, self-reliance, and eventually energy independence.
All right, Narendra, Taneja, and Ambassador Sikri, thank you so much for your time and discussion on this evolving dynamics on geopolitics and, of course, the energy sector, which is, like you rightly said, is an asset and a commodity when we're talking geopolitics. We'll continue tracking all of the key developments that we're seeing through the weekend and really all eyes on Monday morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.